Throughout many of the Legend of Zelda games, you have the hero Link saving the Princess Zelda, and because of this dynamic, many assume that there's some level of a romantic interest. And throughout the course of the different Zelda games, I think some of them, that may very well be the case. But then there are others where it's not so clear. Twilight Princess, for example, Link doesn't have that much of a relationship with the princess, but he does have far more of a relationship with Midna, and also Hylia, his childhood friend. And it's also clear that they always leave things with some level of ambiguity so the player can decide what really transpires. But when it comes to the version of Link and Zelda from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there is a lot more discussion about whether they are in a relationship or not, romantically speaking. So are they? Well, that's what we're talking about today. So I recently beat Tears of the Kingdom, so I figured this would now be a good time to actually talk about having seen the entire story. But I'll put out this warning, there will be spoilers, but I'm not going to get to spoilers until the second half of the video. I'm going to talk about things from the perspective of Breath of the Wild first, and then I'll get into Tears of the Kingdom afterwards, and I'll give you spoiler warning then if you want to click off at that point. It's up to you. Now, I initially thought to make this video when I saw this tweet from Patricia Somerset, who is the voice actress for Princess Zelda in Tears of the Kingdom, and also Breath of the Wild. So this is what was said. Hey friends, I appreciate the passionate discourse on the subject, but I must clarify. Several articles have misrepresented an interview I gave on Tears of the Kingdom and have positioned it as clickbait, and I want to set the record straight. The quote I gave, as a voice actor, looking at the overall relationship between Link and Zelda over the ages, I personally love the ambiguity, and that if there is something there, it's left to us. Does not imply that Link and Zelda are a romantic couple. The quote means that we are in all different types of relationships with friends, family, loves, colleagues, pets, trees, dubious food. It's not up to me to determine. Hopefully these relationships are wonderful and inspiring. The end. So I think there's value in what Patricia's trying to clarify here. Patricia, Miss Somerset, is not trying to say that they are not in a relationship. She's simply saying that throughout the course of the history of the Zelda games, the way it's been handled, it's been left very ambiguous to leave us, the player, to decide how things shake out. But I do think there have been times where that romance has been made very clear and not left as ambiguous. There's always a level of ambiguity, sure, but not always. For example, Skyward Sword, I would argue that they were definitely leaning in the romantic direction. The way Zelda was acting towards Link in the beginning of the game, the way they were approaching each other, that entire dynamic, to me, was absolutely romantic. And if this was in a movie, we all would have been expecting them to get together at the end. Totally. But what about the current Link and Zelda from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom? Well, it's possible for their relationship to change between one game and another. So, I'll save my thoughts for Tears of the Kingdom until, again, later into the video. But just speaking on what we've seen in Breath of the Wild, I also think it's made clear that there is a romantic interest here, for a number of different reasons. So, at first, Link is appointed as the knight to follow around and chaperone and protect Zelda. And early on, Zelda is annoyed at Link. She feels like Link is simply an extension of her father's reach, and it's just kind of keeping her in and not allowing her to do what she wants to do and accomplish what she needs to accomplish. But over time, as they spend more and more time together, those barriers break down. But there's a significant moment where it's a true turning point for their relationship. And that's when Zelda is in the Gerudo Desert being chased down by the Yiga. Her life is in danger. She is about to potentially be mortally wounded. And Link comes out of nowhere and rescues her. He saves the damsel in distress. And when we see this scene and you see the way Zelda is gazing at Link, this is fitting that cliche hero saving princess moment where the hero comes in, saves a damsel in distress, but metaphorically he sweeps her off her feet. She's entranced by this moment, and she starts to fall for Link. Of course, you could argue that just because he saves her doesn't mean that she's going to fall in love with him. It's his job to do that, and maybe she simply started to see Link in a more positive light because he saved her, and it's just that simple. It's not romantic, it's more of an appreciation as a person and a friend. You could make that argument. But there's a little bit more to the story for Breath of the Wild here in terms of their relationship. So, there is Mipha, potentially a third wheel in this. Mipha was the Zora champion. She also had a relationship with Link for many years, actually, as childhood friends. And it seemed like they were very close. Mipha clearly cared about Link. And she was actually in love with him. Why? Because she made the Zora armor for Link, which is something that is used as a marriage proposal. It's meant to be something to symbolize a union of two. So the fact that she made this Zora armor for Link, that shows that she was in love with him and wanted to marry Link. That's 100% romantic interest there. But that doesn't mean Link shared the same feelings. They never made that clear. But something that is said, shortly before the calamity broke out, Mipha talks about how when she's trying to use her powers, she thinks of something she cares about, something she loves. And she was cut off, but the implication here seemed clear that she was suggesting for Zelda that maybe she should think about what's important to her in order to draw out her inner power. So, later on, when the Guardians are taking down Link and he's about to fall in battle, in the very last moment, Zelda's able to bring out her power to save Link. Considering the prior memories talking about using your love and care for something to bring out that power, it feels that there's an additional implication here that Zelda's affection for Link is what brought it out, further supporting the idea that maybe there is something deeper here. Not to mention there's this other moment where Zelda is very upset and she embraces Link in tears because of everything that's happening to Hyrule. Again, she could just do that as a friend, but this is a moment that many would think is arguably romantic. So when you consider all of these things, and then you consider the end for Breath of the Wild, how she asks Link, "Do you remember me?" and then they're traveling alongside Hyrule together, and that they're also the only two that are about the same age from their time, so they have the most in common, there is a lot going for them with this relationship. So I think it is heavily implied that Link and Zelda have something between each other. But have they acted on it? That's unclear. There's a lot to do in Hyrule. But that's just how things stand at the end of Breath of the Wild, in my opinion. A few years have transpired between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Has their relationship evolved or changed in any way since? This is now that moment where if you don't want to be spoiled on the events of Tears of the Kingdom, you can click off the video and perhaps come back later, or if you want to check it out, feel free to. I don't think what I'm going to say is going to totally ruin the experience, but I am going to be talking about some significant elements towards the end of the story as well. So, in the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, Link and Zelda are traveling alongside each other again. There is this issue of the gloom, and it's led them to this deeper part of Hyrule under Hyrule Castle. And the interactions that we see early on here, it's clear that they're at least important to each other. Link has to fight off just a few small keys, and Zelda is checking on his well-being. Now, they are still monsters, and maybe she would ask regardless, but these are fairly insignificant monsters for the hero of Hyrule. Of course, they could still just be friends that are working alongside of each other because they've made it their job to do so. But when Zelda falls, Link reaches for her hand and misses. This moment of trying to catch each other's hands, it is something that I feel has potential romantic implications even though he misses. So again, the story in Tears of the Kingdom in large part is centered around Princess Zelda and trying to find her. And if you played through Tears of the Kingdom, you know that Princess Zelda is in the past. And in the past, we see various different memories. And there's one memory where Zelda is talking to King Rauru and Queen Sonia, and she's speaking of Link, and she's speaking quite highly of Link, saying so many complimentary things. And Rauru and Sonia are taking note of how much Zelda is praising Link. Like, this isn't just Zelda saying, "Oh, I have a friend that's very talented that I think we need to rely on." And maybe you could argue that, I guess, but to me it seems like it's something a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more emotional. She cares about Link deeply, and they're noting, and Rauru and Sonia are talking about how they want to meet Link at some point. And what I think is important about this is that Rauru and Sonia are related to Zelda. In a way, Rauru and Sonia are kind of like her great-grandparents. They're almost like taking on this role of a father and mother to Zelda. Zelda lost her mother early on, and also her father is gone as well. So I do think they're taking on a role kind of like this. They are clearly mentors to her. They are teaching her and guiding her throughout all of this. And they are the beginnings of her bloodline. So I definitely think that there is an absolute familial connection there. So with this in mind, and them having an interest in meeting Link, I think this is strongly suggesting that it's more than just a friendship. But going beyond that, Zelda has this absolute faith in Link to save Hyrule. She sacrifices herself so she can get a restored and powered up Master Sword to defeat Ganondorf. And when I say sacrifice herself, I'm referring to when she swallows a tear to become the immortal Light Dragon. This is a very significant sacrifice. She does everything she can because of how much she believes in Link. Now, it's not just about her care for Link, it's also about her care for her kingdom. She is the princess, and she takes it upon herself to protect the kingdom in any way she can. Of course, with everything that we've discussed so far, I think you could interpret this as just a friendship if you really wanted to, if you were really against them being in a relationship. But there's something in Tears of the Kingdom that I think pretty much straight up confirms that they're in a relationship. And that's the part where you see Link's house in Hateno Village. So, Link had a house in the events leading up to the Calamity in Breath of the Wild, and you can reclaim the house as a side quest in Breath of the Wild when you're playing through in that current time. So it's Link's house. And inside the house, there is a single bed. But you also see some framed pictures or photos that show some things that would be relevant to Princess Zelda, but there is just one bed. One bed to fit one person, potentially, or a couple. And you find a diary in there that is of Zelda, and she speaks on how she has a secret study area that was set so she could study in private. Now, why would she need a secret study area if she's staying in this house? Because she's not alone. And so you can find that she has her own secret room under the well. This is her secret studying space. So she can study and prepare and do things in private because she is staying with someone in the house, and there's this history of the house being of Link. Could you somehow argue, oh, maybe Zelda's staying with someone else in this one bed? That would imply she's in a relationship with someone entirely different, and there's no evidence of her having any sort of relationship with anyone else throughout the course of Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Link doesn't have any competition. So, in my opinion, this straight up confirms that they're in a relationship. Could you somehow argue that maybe they're just friends that share a bed, that stay together, and that are adults in their mid-20s physically? Literally, they're older, but they haven't aged because of circumstances. Point being, though, I think that's just going through many hoops to think that they're not in a relationship. You are entitled to believe what you want, as Patricia Somerset has said. I think a lot of the Zelda games are made in a way to be ambiguous, so you can interpret the story however you choose. Maybe Link and Zelda are in a relationship, but maybe somehow you want to believe that Sidon is Link's true love. Although Sidon is now married to Yona, so that's a whole other complicated relationship dynamic there. I think Link and Sidon are just friends, but of course it's fun to consider other possibilities, I'm sure. Anyways, point is, I think Link and Zelda are clearly in a relationship based off what we see in Hateno Village. Some people argue that some characters don't recognize Link in Hateno Village, and because the house was a side quest in Breath of the Wild, it isn't necessarily Link's in Tears of the Kingdom. But I think it is. I think there are some things that they just decided that would carry over and others that they didn't, in an effort to make it feel fresh for newcomers to this series. I think the ultimate intent here is to show that Link and Zelda are in a relationship. There's even one more point at the end, where Link has to dive to save Zelda, and he embraces her. And later Zelda talks about how she was awoken by a loving embrace. Just a little extra detail there, and how Link had to personally save her in this way, catching her hand, making good on that initial failure at the beginning of the game. I think this is all meant to be romantic. I think that's clear. Now, do they show them making out and having kids and getting married? No, they don't make it that obvious. They're going to leave it for the player to decide what happens afterwards. Maybe the relationship doesn't continue. Maybe they move in different directions. But in terms of what has transpired between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's very clear that they are in a relationship. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below.